Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to start the panel sessions of the second International Conference on Policy Diffusion and Development Cooperation. As most of you know, the conference was planned to occur last year, but we had to postpone it and adapt the in-person meeting to an online event due to the pandemic. We have been organizing this international events on policy diffusion since 2016. This is the third time. The first time was only a seminar, and afterwards, in 2018, the seminar became a conference, and at that time we added also the component of development cooperation, and it was the event grew bigger. We counted more than 200 participants, and it was the first international conference on policy diffusion and development cooperation. We had different challenges. Now, this is the first time everything is going to be digital. We have worked very hard to make this event as possible, especially considering that none of us had a prior experience with such kind of event. This implied almost 1 year of additional work, and it was very complex to prepare such an event in the context of a global pandemic. We started with a few webinars discussing different topics on policy diffusion and development cooperation. These webinars started in July for every 2 months, and they are available on our YouTube channel. And finally, we are now here with the panel sessions. We have been waiting for a long time for this to happen, but it was also interesting because we had more time to work on our research projects in order to ameliorate the quality of the papers that are going to be presented in this event. This event became the largest global space to discuss together policy diffusion and development cooperation. We have now a network of more than 500 subscribers. Our YouTube channel now counts on more than 50 videos on this topic, and most of them are in English. We have several publications that were produced after the discussions we had in this event since 2016. For example, the latest published publications we had was the special issue published in Policy Society called Transnational Policy Transfers, that was organized by Diane Stone, Leslie Paulo, and myself. We collected papers from the last conference in 2018 and published this special issue last year in Policy and Society. Also, the first handbook of policy transfer, diffusion, and circulation is going to be published by Edward Elgar. And this is a major contribution insofar as it brings together most of the preeminent experts in the area. The ebook is the handbook is available for pre-order in the Edward Elgar website. And this year, different panels will result in special issues, and we are also going to publish an ebook with the conference papers. I'm going to leave in the YouTube chat here the description for you to have access to the special issue that we prepared and to the handbook for you to, if you haven't had contact with it yet, to find a little bit more about these publications. In the conference, we are also going to have a book launch. You can find different titles and discount rates on the conference website, and this was only possible due to a partnership with Edward Elgar, Routledge, and Palgrave Publishers. And I would like to thank these publishers for their support. So if you're interested on the titles, you can visit our website and find out more about it. In this conference, we are expecting more than 20 sessions, and we had around 70 registered participants. The full program and all the conference details are available on our website, which is www.policydiffusion.com. Everything of the conference is going to be broadcast in this channel on YouTube. All the sessions will be also recorded for you to watch the videos at any time. And please, if you want to follow the sessions and get reminders, don't forget to subscribe and activate the notifications of our YouTube channel. To conclude, I would like to say that the conference would not have been possible without the support of many colleagues and institutions. I'm not going to mention all their names here, but I would like to thank the support of the College of Public Policies of the Hamad bin Khalifa University, the Brazilian Center of Analysis and Planning, the Laboratory of International Public Policies, the Federal University of São Paulo, and also all the conveners, the panel organizers, the scientific committee, paper and poster presented, as well as the staff of the conference organization and the staff at Cebrap. That said, we can now officially start the event and the panel sessions that will be organized and held in the next following weeks. Thank you very much. And to start this roundtable, which is Roundtable 1, I would like to invite Professor Cecilia Osorio from the University Alberto Hurtado in Chile, who is an expert on the diffusion of conditional cash transfers. She's going to coordinate this roundtable about teaching and doing research in policy diffusion in Latin America. I would like also to make a public advertisement here because Professor Cecilia Osorio has just published her book about conditional cash transfers by Palgrave Macmillan, and you can find also her book in the conference book launch webpage. So with no further words, I would like to invite Professor Cecilia Osorio. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Osmani. Good afternoon to everyone from Santiago, Chile. Thank you for being here with us. I am very happy and proud of being part of one of the first activities of the Second International Conference on Policy Diffusion and Development Cooperation. I really want to thank Osmani for his incredible work designing and organizing it. And thank you to Miwa too for answering our questions and queries. In this roundtable, we are going to hold a conversation around 3 issues that we think reflects the lights and shadows around teaching and researching policy diffusion in Latin America. We are going to discuss with Osmani and with the Dr. Raúl Pacheco Beca. He is an associate professor in the Methods Lab on the Latin American Faculty for Social Science, Flaxo, Mexico. He is a specialist in comparative public policy and focuses on North America environment and politics, primary sanitation, and water governance. He is a member of the Mexican National Research Systems and holds the distinction of National Researcher Level 1. And we have 3 questions, and we want to discuss and put some insights about them. I'm going to start to explaining each question, and we are going to answer them in the following order: Raúl, Osmani, and me. And then our first question is around the challenges of teaching and researching policy diffusion in Latin America. What are these challenges? And then I would like to give the word to Raúl.
Professor Osorio, I'm so delighted, and I want to thank you and Professor Osmani Porto de Oliveira for the invitation. This is such a wonderful conference, and I am really honored to be here with you, and I want to also thank the staff and the organizers of the conference. I'm going to be brief because I think we have a lot of conversation to go on. But I think the major research and teaching issue we have, I think we have two. The first one is the conceptual diversity around what policy diffusion, policy transfer, policy learning, and policy mobilities, for example, which is a term that has been popularized by the geographers, how all of these terms are related to each other. So when we see that two policies are similar, is this a phenomenon that is driven by learning? Are people drawing lessons a la Richard Rose, or are they transferring policy? The early work of, for example, Colin Bennett and Michael Howlett and so on has led us to reflect this. But as you know, the recently edited volume that you, Osmani, Sergio, and your other co-editor, whose name I'm missing unfortunately right now, I mean, there are challenges that are very unique to Latin America. And I think one is the conceptual one is also the empirical one. How do we know that there is diffusion? When do we know that there's learning? When do we know that a policy has, just being converging by virtue of some miracle? So this is I think one of the biggest challenges, conceptual clarity. And the second one is the position of Latin America as the global south, right? Like there is this belief that everything is transferred from the north to the south. And the edited volume you all produced, I think speaks very clearly to the fallacy of that everything emanates from the global north. So, for example, Professor Mauricio Dusosh Laguna has documented how some administrative reforms actually were learned by the Mexican government from the Chilean government. So there's South-South cooperation, and the work of Professor Porto on participatory budgeting in Brazil, your own work on conditional cash transfers, mine on the policy transfer of watershed councils. I think there's always this belief that everything comes from the north, right? Like everything wants to learn everything from the north. And I believe that there is a real need for more empirical cases and more theorizing that is very specific to how we did things in Latin America.
Wow, thank you, Raul, for this amazing reflections. I totally agree with you. And my thoughts on teaching in policy diffusion, transfer, and mobility circulation in Latin America are related to two main issues. So the first one is that I've been teaching this topic to mostly international relations students and public policy students, but I have also started to receive students from economics in my classes. My campus is a campus where we have economics, and the students from these disciplines are also more interested in understanding how public policy works, and also about this process of diffusion. So I think that one of the major strengths of understanding and teaching policy diffusion is this character of the multidisciplinarity of this topic. So this is a very positive point. The second point that it's very interesting for me while I'm teaching is that we have so many examples of policy transfers that we can use in our classrooms. For example, when I'm teaching, I often ask my students to do a quick research about São Paulo and policies that were imported or exported, and it's very surprising the number of experience that I don't know that they collect and bring to me as examples of policy transfers. Just to mention a few, and this can be of very small instruments that are alive in our everyday activities in the city. One example is the use of, and this is happening all over the world now, it was the change from the paper ticket to the subway to the card one. And this was, if I'm not wrong, an innovation that started in France, and then it spilled over across the world, and then it arrived also in Brazil with a sort of single card for for using the metro. The other is also related to France, which is an event here we have that is called Virada Cultural, the cultural change, which is a big event that used to happen in São Paulo when we could agglomerate, but now we're not doing this anymore. But it was inspired by the Nuit Blanche in France, where there were all different types of cultural activities during the night. So it's very interesting for us about how many examples of policy diffusion we have here. And this is also related to the other question, which is about the challenges of doing research. So the challenges for me associated to teaching and research are the fact that we are still focusing on best practices or on emblematic examples of policy diffusion. A lot of work done on conditional cash transfers, participatory budgeting, bus rapid transit, and so on and so on. And it would be really interesting for us to have more information, more research, master students, PhD, on this small or other examples of policy diffusion. And the second element that I would like to bring here to our discussion, I'll do this very shortly, is something that I really miss in my classes. And it's a sort of a historical account on policy diffusion in the region. So, and this is in Brazil, we don't have much of this very strong board on the history of public policy making. And it will be, I think also for the region, very valuable for us to understand more about these movements of import, export, and hybrid production of hybrid models in time, in history. I can't start my course with such an overview of this process in Latin America or in Brazil, and I really miss this kind of research. That is policy diffusion in Brazil or in Latin America from a historical perspective. And I'm not meaning only a historical account of state institutions, which we have some, but of public policies, these movements of how Getúlio Vargas imported policies or exported and the following periods, as so on and so on. So I really miss this. I don't know how it is in your countries, in Chile or in Mexico, but I think this would be a very good point to start discipline of policy diffusion. And include this, associate this with the conceptual elements that Raul brought to us and the empirical elements that he discussed before. So these are my first thoughts.
Thank you, Osmani, and thanks, Raul, for your words. Okay, my reflections about the challenges of teaching and researching, I think that I agree with you. I think that one of the challenges lies in the fact that transfer and diffusion studies come from diverse literatures, as for example, public policies and international relations. In Latin America, those are usually independent areas of study in undergraduate and postgraduate programs in different departments inside universities. Therefore, I think that for teaching and researching purposes, we need to integrate those areas of study and to adopt a multidisciplinary perspective, as you mentioned. This is not easy when students or scholars apply only a single perspective and they look the other as a completely different thing. And in that sense, policy diffusion and transfer studies motivate us to integrate diverse approaches to understand our object of study. Indeed, as an example, when I started to develop my research years ago, I had to read a lot of books on international relations, which I hadn't read from my undergraduate program. And in that sense, I think that we have a challenge here, how to apply, how to really integrate this multidisciplinary perspective in our teaching, in our research, in our courses, how we have to do that. In addition to the above, policy diffusion and transfer studies are a relatively new field in the region. Even in some cases, it is necessary, at least for me, to present them to some colleagues and explain their particularities and contributions. I have to take some time to explain that. Along with that, although there is a large body of literature, it is not as extensive in Spanish, and that can be difficult for Latin American students, at least in our case in Chile, especially for undergraduate students. And on the other hand, I think that the theoretical body is significant, and as you mentioned, we have a lot of cases of diffusion and transfer, but I think that we have to continue researching, analyzing, and writing in Spanish and Portuguese and English about them. I think that we need more literature, and especially in Spanish and Portuguese, to continue researching and teaching about policy diffusion and transfer. I think that this are my thoughts about it, my reflections about this first issue or question. Then I would like to pass to the second one. What is the state of the art? What do we know, and what are the future questions that we are facing about policy diffusion and transfer? Raul, if you can continue with this.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. I am always in awe of you and Osmani, how much I learn from you both. And I just want to zero in on something that you both clarified that I think zeroes in also on the question of what we know, the state of the art, and where we're going. You both demonstrated that there are historical roots to policy diffusion. So there are things that include learning from each other. Like, for example, if I go and do my PhD to a different country, that's a way of transferring knowledge, and that knowledge can also be transferred to my own students. So is that a form of policy learning? It is, and we may not have called that policy diffusion, we may not have called it policy learning. So that's why what Osmani said is so true. We need a historical perspective, which takes me to what we know and the state of the art. I think we know policy transfer takes place through different pathways. So it can be government to government, government to academic. It can go in different pathways. Where I would like to see a lot more work done is on across levels. So, for example, why do we have, for example, food security programs at the federal level that are not transferring to the state level and others are? So I think the first question I would say is we know how policy is transferred, how it's diffused, how it converges. What we don't know and we need to do more is how it transfers across scales. So for example, from the federal level to the subnational level to what in Mexico would be the municipal level. We also fail to address properly the transfer of negative results. So everybody's like, I want to learn about a new public policy. So, in my field, in environmental policy, I want to learn how other cities are decarbonizing, how are they reducing their carbon footprint. That's fantastic. But maybe we can also transfer negative lessons of what we should not be doing, right? I think that's a very unexplored issue. And the third one, which relates to what you just said about, international relations and policy sciences and so on, is how we can draw for, instead of building these disciplinary silos, policy mobilities is what geographers do, and we do policy transfer, and IR people say, this is norm diffusion and so on. How can we build a more interdisciplinary approach to developing policy diffusion, policy transfer, policy learning scholarship? So I think that integration is still missing. So to recap, first, we need, yes, a more historical perspective. Two, across levels, policy learning across levels. And three, we need to stop the disciplinary silos and just be able to say, we're drawing from multiple disciplines, but our problem is how do these ideas travel, and how can we make sure that ideas travel that can be positive, the transfer of positive results, but also the transfer or diffusion of learning of negative results. That's what that would be my response.
Excellent. Hi. So excellent, Ro. Thank you. I totally agree with you with this points. We really need some more conceptual work, as well as bringing to the table this multidisciplinarity, even beyond international relations and geographer, but also including economists, law researchers, and so on and so on. But I would like to add to this discussion two different reflections on the question raised by Cecilia. And the first one is both of them are related to what we are living now. And the first one is the role of the South in the global public policy making, and how the South how can we understand more the power relations of the South in this global realm of public policy making, which involves lots of transfers of disputes among the best models, and so on and so on. So what's the role of the South? What is the contribution of the South? What is it its place, Latin America, Africa, or Asian countries, and so on, in this topic? And this is the first question. I think that the conference back in 2018 and now we have started to work on this, bringing more research from the South to the debate. But I still need that we have a lot of room to improve our reflections and our work on this. And the second point, which is the most important, I would like to bring here, is related to the dialogue between academia and practice. So how can we translate our research findings into policy advice, or how this can be useful for public policy making? I think this is a very important question that we are facing now in the context of the pandemic, because first of all, we needed answers about how to transfer successful public policies to fight against COVID-19, and we needed this rapidly. And I don't think that policy transfer studies really helped much in this sense. So I really think that this is something that we need to explore, how policy transfer can help public policy making, or how can we make this connection, which can be in both ways. Also by using the practice information from the practice to understand better our phenomena. And this is also very interesting and important because, of course, not all students of public policy transfers are going to be academics. Most of my students are going to work in the practice. They are going to be practitioners. So this is very important for them as well. In this sense, the question I would like to raise here is related to policy transfer and state capacities. What are the skills, the capacities that are required from a government, a governmental institution, or an organization to accomplish a policy transfer, to make a policy transfer successful if this organization, government, wants to provide a solution for a certain problem? What are the elements that might not be taken into consideration, or the elements that are needed to avoid in order to make a successful policy transfer, and so on and so on. This is also related to the old Dulwich and Marshall framework, how policy transfer can be used to understand the success or the failure of public policies in general. So these are my two reflections.
Thank you, Osmani and Raul, for your intensive reflection. I think that we have a lot to talk during this roundtable and in the next panel of the conference. My thoughts about the state of the art. I think that we have a rich debate in the literature, and sometimes it's needed to take a position on it. In this sense, in some of our works in the book that you mentioned, we have adopted a pluralistic and open perspective regarding the debate in the literature of diffusion and transfer. Our perspective put order in this complex and enormous group of concepts and levels in sometimes. And in some ways, we take a position which contribute to navigate among these diverse alternatives. And I think that we are in a point in the development of the literature on diffusion and transfer that we have to start to take some positions because we have a lot of concept and theory as we mentioned. Also, one area to deepen in future studies refers to the relationships between diffusion and transfer. I think that we have to discuss in detail about it. If the diffusion results in the spread of ideas and models, transfer enables the particular element of a public policy and policy instrument that are required to implement the programs and in circulations. Diffusion is uncoordinated, but in transfer we have this the specific transfer of different components. And I think that we have to start to discuss how the diffusion process, this uncoordinated process, contribute to an atmosphere and an environment which can incentivize transfer. Policy transfer. I have been studying this kind of process, but I think that we have to discuss in detail how to manage and how to deal with the two concepts, policy diffusion as this uncoordinated process and policy transfer, that this specific transfer that we have a lot of examples. I think that we have some questions that we have to continue discussing here. And I think that another significant challenge to continue discussing in the literature is refers to discuss the particularity of the actors present in the different cases we can see in Latin America or in the global South. We have to define if we can identify a specific actor for the Latin American cases, for example. This actor differs from other public political sector. We have a lot of labels about actors. Do they contribute to identify particularities of each of them? I think that we have to also discuss of some of the actors are particularly Latin American. Oh, we are talking about actors for the global south. We have a lot of labels about it, and I think that we have a lot to research about this. And we have a third question, and this is the last one, and we are going to start to pick up some of the questions from the audience. Our last question or issue is regarding to the methodologies. What is your opinion about the methodologies for teaching and researching on policy diffusion and transfer? Raul, please.
Thank you. I think this is where these technologies can be extraordinarily helpful. I think how we teach policy transfer can be extraordinarily enriched by how we use it, right? Like how we can use all the tools at our disposal. And one of the biggest tools at our disposal, I think, is the ability to bring in the scholarship of other researchers like you, like me, like, Sergio, Mauricio, David Dolo, David Marsh, etc. So all of the researchers who work on this field, Diane Stone, Leslie Powell, and how we can integrate them into our classrooms. I think online technologies open this possibility the most, and I think this is a very underutilized ability. Now, there's one big question in this. Instead of answering, I'm going to pose it as a question mark to discuss maybe during the question and answer period. I believe after our interventions, we'll have some time to have a conversation with those who are watching from afar. But I think the question would be, how do we teach the fieldwork that we need to really understand policy transfer and diffusion? I mean, there are people like Covadonga Meseguer, the work of Helge Jorgens and so on, who have studied convergence and diffusion, but in a quantitative way. My question is, do we have a way that is less quantitative? I mean, my work uses mixed methods, but I've done a lot of field work to understand policy transfers, and this field work, I believe, is important. So one of the biggest issues I find for this would be, how do we make this this transition to using different methods, but also how do we do field work under COVID? I mean, I would love to see and to do more field work on how there was transfer from one country to another on a lot of the water reforms in Mexico that derive from the French model of water governance. But I can't enter France right now. There is no way I'm going to be able to enter France. How can I do field work in France? And so these become really interesting questions, right? Like, how do we make it so that it's pluralistic and in methods, but also how do we do field work in conditions that do not enable us to do field work, and particularly international field work? If you think about it, you could potentially, being very careful, do field work in Argentina, being in Chile, but not everybody's going to be able that kind of transition. And even, for example, with countries that have borders closed, it's going to be even harder to study the diffusion and transfer of policies. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges, and I think it's an important challenge to consider and to think about. Right. So that would be one of the biggest challenges to teaching and to doing research. And the other one, I think it's an opportunity. So the opportunity is, how do we bring all these wonderful scholars, and share the work that we have in this field?
So thank you, Raul, for this very good reflections, and thank you, Cecilia, for such a very instigating question. This made me think about a question to Raul that I'm going to ask him later. And really, methodology is something that we still need to take more seriously from the policy transfer diffusion perspective. My contribution to this reflection is related to comparative research in Latin America. I think that we still have little about comparative studies on policy transfers, on cases of policy transfers in Latin America. If we take, for example, what happened in Europe, of course, it's a very different context, but policy transfer and regional integrations kind of had approached together, and there is a full literature about the Europeanization process that that emerged from this combination, and other types of research as well. We still don't have this kind of studies about Latin Americanization and policy transfers here, and I think this would be very interesting for us to think about. We also had a few specific projects about comparing policies in the region. Cecilia Osorio work about Chile and Ecuador is one of these. Also, Sarah Brooks did some work also with the pensions reform. But I'm still missing some broader comparative research. So what are the methods required for us to do comparative research here in Latin America? Or perhaps a more relevant question, which is not related to the comparative research per se, but it's related to it, which is what are the necessary means for us to do comparative research in Latin America? For example, funding projects, collaboration among research institutes, and so on and so on. I still think that we are missing these opportunities and means to do important comparative research here in the region, in spite of having very important innovations, as I mentioned previously, in the region that were worldwide best practices. Conditional cash transfers, participatory budgeting, bus rapid transit, and so on and so on. So my question is my reflection is more related to how can we engage in broader comparative research in the region, and also what are the means needed for accomplishing this. I remember that when I was a master's student, in the early 2000s, we used to read a lot this compilation of chapters in I think it was a 3-volume book about published by O'Donnell, Schmitter, and Whitehead, about the transitions of democracy in Latin America, which was a sort of a huge success. And I think that it would be very nice for us to have something like this about policy diffusion in Latin America, something thinking the different experiences, comparing systematically, and so on and so on. So this is my main reflection. I would like also to no, I'll do this later. I have a question to Raul. No, I'll do this now, and then Raul, you can reply it later. So you were talking about how we do field research in COVID, and I've been thinking a lot about this because mostly my research was basically doing transnational political ethnography and visiting place and doing interviews and so on and so on. And now we can do that, which okay, for me it's okay. But for example, I have my master's students and one master's student in particular that started her research a few weeks or maybe months before the pandemic and the global lockdown. And she wanted to do a research. It was on the Paris Agreement and the implications of the Paris Agreement in a specific city in Brazil, and probably her whole master is going to take place during the pandemic. So what are your advices? I would like you to ask you what are your answers, because this is what we are needing now. We of course need some reflections. How do we do this ethnography during COVID and so on and so on? But for some people, we won't have the time to get to the answer in the near future. We need answers now. So how can we adjust our methodology? Is it, for example, sufficient to have Zoom meetings or document analysis? What are your advices based on your experiences? So often I think about what Raul would answer if he was asked these questions, and I have my students asking me questions. So, and of course, I have a lot of esteem for you in the methodology and the ethnography. So I wanted to ask you this. Sorry if I took, sorry, Cecilia, to breaking the protocol, but yeah, okay, that's it.
Hi, everyone. Yes, so I had the same problem. I have one of my students two of my students wanted to do field work for COVID. One of them was on ethnography of vulnerable populations, homeless people, and the other one was on care work. And what I've told them is, there are ways to observe without putting yourself at risk on the one hand, but also there are ways to do this sort of in a less intrusive way. So for example, instead of really embedding yourself in, you can approach this through what is called the expert opinion elicitation. So maybe I cannot go and really be close to people who are homeless, but I may be able to draw some insights based on the experiences of ethnographers who have done ethnography of homeless people. So that's one way. It's a roundabout way, and it's not perfect, but under COVID, there's very little we can do with, to substitute ethnography. A lot of people say, well, you could just pivot to digital ethnography. And I'm like, well, I don't think everybody who is homeless is going to have access to a telephone that has 3G and internet. So I think we need to, go to experts and to do more of what is called a little bit hearsay ethnography. So, it's sort of a collateral ethnography. There's also, in the case of, if you're doing this work with other scholars, you can also do storytelling. You can, instead of in-depth interviewing, you can say, well, tell me story. And this also requires, safety measures and precautionary measures, but you could also do some of that. But that again requires doing transfer at the subnational level rather than at the international level, unless you interview experts. Because if you can't cross borders, then there is no way you can do transnational political ethnography like you did, like I've done, and so on. So that would be my answer. Yes, so I hope that answers the question. Thank you, Osmani.
Thank you, Osmani, and thank you for the new question to Raul. Thank you, Raul, for your answer. I just want to mention a short answer about the question about the methodology. I think that I agree with you. We have a huge issue here. And I think that you mentioned some of this about the relation between quantitative methodology and qualitative methodology. I think that regrettably, studies applying both methods are scarce. And I think that it's not necessarily that all the works have to apply both methodologies, but I think that the relevant point is to do not consider then the quality and quantity methods as two separate and irreconcilable areas, since the different views complement our understanding about the field of the study. The works that have combined the use of qualitative and quantitative methodology give a more complete and complex view of the process of policy diffusion and transfers. Especially for the process of diffusion, I think that the quantitative analysis allows the clarification of variables that can be deepened in the case studies. Also, only through qualitative methodology and, as you mentioned, ethnography techniques, it is possible to unpack the process of adoption of policies that result from diffusion or transfer processes from one country to another. Then I think that we have to continue combining methods and trying to define for what goals we have to use each of them. But I think that if we had continued combined methods, it would be richer for our studies. And I think that I really like to apply a qualitative approach, and although I have developed both, and I think that specifically process tracing, for instance, make a relevant contribution to our goal. Because it's contributed to identify and unpacking the causal mechanism that explains policy transfer or policy diffusion. That was my short answer about this. And now I'm going to read. We have a question from Felipe Salazar. I'm going to read it, and we are going to answer in the same order. Felipe Salazar asks how to define research questions and proper methods according to the topic of analysis. Do you have examples from your own research? Raul, if you want to start.
Yes, thank you so much, Cecilia. Thank you so much to Felipe Salazar, and also to the very encouraging comment of Camila Sanchez. We are delighted to be sharing. As anybody who reads my blog will know, I love students and I love teaching and I love having these opportunities. So being able to share the stage in the International Conference on Policy Diffusion, it's just spectacular. So how do we narrow a good research question and the proper method for the topic of analysis? It's a fantastic question that Felipe Salazar is posing. And I can tell you specific to mine. I am interested in understanding the processes through which the notion of the Watershed Council, the notion of the Integrated Water Resource Management, IWRM, permeate and have permeated in the way in which we govern water, specifically in Mexico, but I've also studied water governance in France and Spain and other countries. But I want to specifically zero in on the great question on how do you design a good research question. A good research question, to me, is something that is very narrow, very specific, in that I can have the tools and the techniques to respond to. So in this case, the way I wanted to respond to that, I thought I could, the research question I was looking to answer was, what are the factors that drive learning of the strategy of governing by watershed councils in Mexico? So to answer that question, I need to first trace the historical development of the concept of IWRM, Integrated Watershed Water Resources Management. Two, I also needed to interview people who have developed the process in Mexico. Three, I also needed to interview people who developed the idea of IWRM. And four, I also had to do ethnography of a watershed council. In this specific case, I did the Lerma Chapala River Basin Council, and explore how different river basin councils ended up adopting this. You can do some quantitative work. I mean, if you do the historical analysis, you can see that in 1999 there was an explosion of watershed councils in Mexico. These coincide with the declaration of the Organization for Cooperation and Development, OECD, Economic Cooperation and Development, declaration that the best way to govern water is by river basin councils. They still say that. This is one way of forced transfer. So the OECD is convinced and has convinced governments that the best way to govern watershed councils, the best way to govern water is by watershed councils. So I traced the intellectual history using archival and historical methods. And then I did what Professor Osorio just mentioned. I did process tracing, and I traced the process through which the implementation of the water directives in Mexico included now IWRM. And then I also did ethnography during 3 years of the Lerma Chapala River Basin Council. So I combined 3 methods, and it takes forever and 2 years. So when my students say, I want to use multiple methods in my thesis, and they're undergrad or masters, even some PhDs, I'm like, I don't think you understand the amount of time that it involves to do proper process tracing. I mean, you can ask Cecilia. Doing good process tracing takes a long time. You can ask Osmani. Doing a lot of really good transnational political ethnography also takes a lot of time. That's something that is not budgeted in completion programs. My doctoral students have at most 4 years to finish their doctoral dissertation. Do I really want them to do a political ethnography that involves more than 2 countries? Hell no. That's unless they have the funding. I don't want them to go through that risk. So sorry, my response was a little bit too long, but there we go.
Thank you very much for this very interesting question, Felipe. Also, thank you for Camila Sanchez for the comment. It's very important for us to receive your questions and feedbacks because it helps us to think about our own research and also to offer kinds of answers to people who are in the early stages of conducting a master or a PhD in policy diffusion. I'll talk about my own experience, and then I will give open to a few other examples that I know of methodologies and research questions that are interesting for people to follow. My biggest work was about the global diffusion of participatory budgeting, and I wanted to understand how it started in Brazil and it spread all over the world. And one of my questions was to understand why participatory budgeting from the city of Porto Alegre had a bigger international impact compared to other Brazilian cities, so similar Brazilian cities. And in order to answer this, to understand why Porto Alegre was the big example, I used a comparative method, the Mills method of most similar system design, and I did a process tracing with all 3 cities. I was comparing Porto Alegre, Recife, and Belo Horizonte. And in my comparison, I tried to understand. So I did a process tracing of the internationalization of participatory budgeting of these 3 cities, and I tried to understand what were the elements that remained constant in the cities, and what were the elements that were variating. So after this process tracing, I was able to understand those distinguishing elements from Porto Alegre that I understood that were fundamental to make a broader international impact in the city. So basically, I was combining a simple qualitative research method design, process tracing, and associating with a comparative research design, most similar system from Mills. So this is one way you can do it. A lot of people doing, as you have heard here, doing policy transfer uses process tracing. A lot of people doing public policy analysis uses process tracing. This is very interesting, a very useful tool. It needs to be used with a lot of rigor, but it's very useful if you want to understand the process, the agents, the multiple stop and goes of the policy. If you want to understand the changes along the way, the changes of the policy, and so on and so on. So process tracing can be very useful for you to rebuild the path of the international diffusion of a certain type of policy. Another option that I haven't seen been doing lately is the use of surveys to understand, for example, the role of a civil servant, public servants in policy adoption. So there is a research of Natalia Koga, who is also participating in this conference. You can check her name later in the program. But she did a survey about the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in Brazil by the public administration, and she used a survey method, which is for me very interesting because I haven't seen much of policy transfer research using this type of methodology. And to conclude my answer, the use of social network analysis is still not much implemented in our policy transfer research, and there is a panel dedicated specifically to this topic in the conference. It's the panel organized by Chris Walker and Alex Mullis, which will have different people presenting on how to use social network to understand policy transfer. So with this, I would conclude my answer.
Thank you, Osmani, and thank you, Felipe, for your question. I don't have too much to add to the answer of Osmani and Raul. I just want to continue with something that I mentioned before. I think that it depends a lot about what if you are studying policy diffusion or policy transfer, and what is your scope. I mean, I like to apply quantitative methods to test diffusion process and to identify the independent variables. I think that in that sense it's very useful. And then you can go for a case study and qualitative methods to go further to unpack the process and to test if that variable is really the explanation for the diffusion process. But of course, if you want to, if your question, your specific question, as Raul mentioned, and I agree completely with him about it, you have to go with qualitative method. I really like and agree with all your comments about process tracing. You have to go with interview, you have to go with survey, you have to go with to obtain primary and secondary sources, and to compile this huge group of evidence. We need to have a lot of evidence to test, to really prove the transfer process in the case that you were studying. And that thing, in that sense, it depends a lot of your question, depends a lot of your scope, and depends a lot if you are studying diffusion or policy transfer. And that's one of the thing I would like to add to the incredible answers from Osmani and Raul. And okay, I think that we are on time. We have been discussing for an hour about this. This is the first activity of this second conference. I really want to thank to Raul for being with us in this conversation, and I really want to thank to Osmani for the opportunity. And I would like to invite to all of you to continue listening and discussing with us in the following panels during February and March. Thank you very much for me from here, and Osmani is going to close this roundtable. Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Thank you, Raul. Thank you, everyone who is from home watching this video, this live webinar. This is, as Cecilia mentioned, this is the first roundtable, and we are going to have in the next weeks lots of panels with very interesting works, papers from participants coming from all over the world. This is a very big opportunity for us to share our thoughts in this context of change. So policy transfer research, as well as research in other areas, are going to be profoundly affected by the context and the situation of the global pandemic. And this is this conference is also an opportunity for us to think about, to discuss these elements, as we have been doing here with this webinar on teaching and doing research on policy transfer diffusion in Latin America. So I would kindly invite you to stay tuned to our YouTube channel, to our website, policydiffusion.com. Check the program, follow us on our social media, because everything is going to happen in the following weeks. And if you miss one session or another, don't worry. Everything is going to be recorded, and it will be available here in this YouTube channel. So with this, I would like to close this first roundtable. This roundtable replaced panel 1, which was canceled. And I would like to thank you again for watching, and we'll keep in touch. Thank you very much, and a very good afternoon, night, depending on where you are. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.